There was a Financial Times article that was released by Christopher Miller and a few other journalists talking about how the United States government had warned the Ukrainians against targeting Russian oil fields. Now, there was some skepticism around this article, just like there was skepticism around Christopher Miller's previous reporting on Zaluzhny stepping down and being fired and replaced by Syrskyi. But just like in that instance, Christopher Miller was proven right again, and we now have reporting from the Washington Post in an interview with Zelensky where he has come forward and said, yes, the United States did approach Ukraine, and yes, they did request that we tone it down, so to speak. Let's read this. This is from the Wall Street Journal. As Russian drones, missiles, and precision bombs break through Ukrainian defense to attack energy facilities and other essential infrastructure, Zelensky feels he has no choice but to punch back across the border in the hope of establishing deterrence. An example is Ukraine's drone strikes against Russian refineries over the past month. I asked Zelensky if U.S. officials had warned against such attacks on energy facilities inside Russia, as has been rumored in Washington. The reaction of the U.S. was not positive on this, he confirmed, but Washington couldn't limit the deployment of Ukraine's home-built weapons. We used our drones. Nobody says to us that you can't. Let me read that again. We used our drones. Nobody can say to us that you can't. The "our" here is emphasized. Now, I don't know if there's video of the interview, but if it's a written interview, it sounds like he probably emphasized the word "our." And the reason why is there's been a big debate about whether we should send ATACMS long-range missiles to the Ukrainians, because there's a chance that they would take them and then fire them at the Russians to hit airfields, to hit oil refineries, to hit the different parts of the Russian war machine that is, producing the war within Russia, the places that the bombers are coming from to bomb Ukraine, the places that are being used to finance the war effort. Now, the American government didn't end up giving them these long-range missiles. We did eventually give them M39 block ATACMS that have like half the range, and we give them a very small amount, which they use to target Russia's drone helicopter fleet effectively, by the way, within Ukrainian territory. So we still haven't given the ATACMS. There's rumors that if the next aid package gets approved, then maybe we will give ATACMS. But as for right now, we haven't given them that, in large part because we were scared of giving them those long-range missiles and then seeing them used again against Russian air bases, used against other locations, which could then escalate. Or at least there's a fear that that could cause escalation. Now, I would point out the fact that we've already seen American equipment used within Russia. We saw American jeeps, American rifles, American munitions used in cross-border raids by Russian-backed Ukrainian forces, which, I don't think those jeeps appeared out of nowhere. They had to get them from somewhere. And so there's already been some examples of equipment being used, but there is a significant difference between using an American missile to strike an airfield with expensive Russian bombers on it and an American Jeep being used, because any type of armored vehicle could technically perform that purpose. Not anything in Ukraine's arsenal can act like an American missile. Now, American armored vehicles are stronger in instances in protecting their the people inside them than a lot of these BMP-1s, BP-2s. But these missiles are not comparable, I think, to the Jeeps. And so there's a fear that it could cause escalation. And so they've held back on it. And so since the United States has held back on it, since the Germans have held back on sending the Taurus missiles, the British have sent Storm Shadows, but not enough, certainly, to...
Stains25 has donated $10.
Oh, thank you.
I'm 100% pro-Ukraine, but I do share the Fed's fear of Russia collapsing. Who knows where those nukes can end up if Russia becomes a failed state?
Thank you so much for the $10. We can take a break for a moment and I can just explore this for a second. This is the big fear of the American government, which is Russia itself collapsing. If they cannot finance the country and the country starts to break down, or Putin's government collapses and it causes a massive civil war, what happens with the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet? It's part of the reason why we wanted the Ukrainians to give up their nukes in the first place over to the Russians, because we wanted to concentrate all the nukes in one place. And now we have the situation we have now. So yes, there is a legitimate fear from Washington of the Russian government collapsing. But I will also say that that fear also existed for the Soviet Union. And if a government's going to collapse because then it cannot support its own weight, we should not go out of our way to keep the Russian government afloat. The collapse of the Soviet Union was going to happen no matter how much we tried to move out of our way to maybe keep them up a little bit out of fear, because the system was collapsing. It was not able to finance itself. It was losing popular support. And so at some point, Putin's regime will be gone, and we should be prepared for that scenario. But it makes sense for Western leaders to not want it to be some crazy scenario where the central government loses control of nukes and we don't know where they go. I understand that fear, because we don't want these types of weapons ending up in the hands of groups that have extremely nefarious purposes, even more nefarious than the Russian government currently, which is already pretty nefarious, at least when it comes to using these to intimidate people and invade other countries. Now, I want to just say, we said no missiles. We didn't send the missiles. And so the Ukrainians said, fine, we'll make our own stuff. And so at the start of the war, they had weapons that could go 250 feet. Not 250 feet, 250 kilometers. It could go, 200, it's a distance, but you certainly aren't going anywhere near St. Petersburg. You certainly aren't going to be striking all of these oil refineries with that. But through the war, they've kept improving and improving and improving and testing and improving. And now they have drones, unmanned UAVs, that can go 1,250 kilometers. And there have been bombing attacks on St. Petersburg. There have been bombing attacks at all these other locations. And they have went out of their way, after being limited by their Western allies and what support they were willing to give. They went and did the development themselves. And now it's like, wait, not only can you not use our weapons to do this, we don't want you to do it, period. Now, this is also being said at the same time, at the exact same time, where American aid is still being held up from Ukraine. So here's the scenario. 6 months. Let me put that date on it. It's now been 6 months that we've been waiting for a new aid package, something, after this was said, okay, we're going to do something in last September. 6 months. We have sent nothing. That last 300 million package that we sent over was a scraping together what we could from the savings on arms contracts. It was quite literally scraping the bottom of the barrel. Okay, I should really stop using the word literally, because I get annoyed when other people use the word literally like that. I gotta stop using the word literally like that. But it was scraping the bottom of the barrel. Just literally would imply there's an actual barrel. Maybe there is. The Russians are getting desperate. But the Ukrainians really, really, really want to undermine Russia's war-making capacity. And these oil production facilities finance the war. Russia, while it's called like a gas station with a nuclear arsenal, they do have other aspects of their economy, but oil production, energy production, still a massive factor in it. It's still the overwhelming factor in how they finance their war-making, how they finance their government. And so if you're the Ukrainians and the Russians are continuing to push and showing no sign of letting up, and this is going to become an attritional struggle, or it has a high risk of becoming an attritional struggle, and you agree with the West that sanctions should be placed to undercut the Russian economy, why not undercut it in a much more direct way? Now that you've done all this investment into these drones, what are you going to use them for? Are you really going to develop drones that you can send over 1,250 miles and not use them to undercut the Russian war economy? Not use them to undercut Russia's war-making ability? What, are they just supposed to put them on the shelf? Maybe target non-oil production facilities? I don't know. But the point is, the Russian oil production facilities are financing the war. If you want the war not to be financed and you want the tanks to stop coming, you cannot merely fight the war in Ukraine. If you want to undercut the fight where the fight is starting, which is at the production lines, at the recruitment centers, and even further back, how they finance the war, then you want to target where they make their money. And that's why the Ukrainians have targeted enough oil fields that reports are suggesting that 10% of Russia's oil-making capacity has been disabled by the Ukrainians. Now, 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. It is quite a lot. And every time another percentage point gets added to that, it's going to be a problem for the Russians. Now, why would the United States not want this? Well, there could be the problem of collapse, or there could be another problem, which is oil prices. If the Russians are putting less oil on the international market, even if we are now the largest oil producer in the world, we're producing tons of liquefied natural gas.
25 has donated $5. I read online that Russian oil refineries rely on tech from the West. If it's true, that's devastating to Russia because of sanctions.
Thank you so much for the $5. I appreciate that. There's a lot of stuff like that. The Russians are trying to find replacements from the Chinese or other countries, but it's been quite a problem. There's a similar thing when it came to the automotive industry. There's a similar thing when it came to the airplane industry. There's a lot of industries that are like that. Oh man, where was I? Oh gosh, I lost my place. What was it? Where was I? Hey Dylan, is there any chance you can interview the members of the well, let me finish the story first. Oh yeah, God, Danabo's gonna be a bitch editing this. This is gonna be Danabo's job tonight, and gonna be a bitch because of I love the donations. It's just they really do throw me off sometimes in the middle of a rant, and then I'm like, I go on a different spiel, and I'm like, where did I stop off in the last spiel? Because I have to imagine that being either cut out or Danabo keeping it in. Oh, percentage. Yeah, 10%. Okay. I don't remember exactly where I was. I'm just gonna start randomly again, back in somewhere in the story, near the end. So the West is in this weird position where they've been blocking aid for 6 months, or it hasn't, or the United States has been blocking aid for 6 months, because of Congress. Aid's not coming anymore. The last 300 million has been approved. And if the last, was that oil prices? Thank you, Zirin, for waiting until after I went back. Whatever. I do appreciate somebody spoke up about it. Thank you for saying oil prices. I think that there might be a fear of oil prices rising, that with less oil being put into the international market, less Russian crude being put into the international market, that's going to lead to an increase in oil prices. Now, it is true that the United States produces more liquefied natural gas, more natural energy, more energy from old dinosaur bones now than ever, and that we're producing more than any other country on the planet. And some people would say that and say, look, we have energy independence, and we do in a way, but we are still affected by the throes and waves of international energy trade, because our companies export American crude and American products, especially American liquefied natural gas, which has been exported in mass to Europe to make up for the drop in Russian energy purchases. We are scared that if the Russians produce not enough oil, even if we're not buying the oil from them, then China or others will have to go buy from other locations. The price of oil will go up, and that will ultimately affect American consumers. And going into an election year, that could be a problem. Now, Biden has said that he doesn't want to consider those types of things like, oh, how will this affect me in this election? How will that affect me in that? He wants to decide these things based on what is America's core national security interest. And I hope that's the case. I hope the electioneering does not take priority here, but I don't know. I'm not in the room. And the suggestion at the very least had to be brought up about that possible motivation. But I just have to say that it would probably make the Ukrainians listen more if we had some oomph behind this. Say, here's 60 billion, here's 70 billion. Now you have to listen to what we say. But if we're asking them to handcuff themselves while also holding back on giving them the ammo that they need to fight, you can't be that surprised after they spent all this time researching these weapons to carry out these types of operations, because we wouldn't provide them these types of weapons, if they look at us as, let's just say, Yankees filled with hubris. Anyway, I think that the Ukrainians probably are not going to stop doing the oil attacks anytime soon. They're probably going to continue it. And if they're going to stop it, it'll probably only be after the West gives them sufficient reason to want to stop it.